Welcome. Glad to see everyone here. Initially, I'm going to be sharing some information that's less commonly known, so I'd like to let you know my sources. I've taken most of my information from Helena Petrovna Blavatsky, who, as many of you know, is one of the founders of the Theosophical Society in 1875. And her major work is The Secret Doctrine. And she goes into the origin and evolution of a human being in anthropogenesis and the origin and evolution of the universe. The rest of my sources are from HPB again, The Fundamentals of Esoteric Philosophy. And then Grace Noki has a small book that's available online, free, on the mystery schools. And she bases most of her stuff from The Secret Doctrine as well. It's very good. And then Charles Leadbeater, Masters and the Path. And then Initiation, The Perfecting of Man by Annie Besant, as well as an article by Annie Besant on the mysteries, you can see there. And then Boris Dezerkov, a distant cousin to Blavatsky, he wrote an article on the winter solstice, and that's where a lot of mine is from. Then Manly P. Hall, excellent writer, The Secret Teachings of All Ages, and then Man, the grand symbol of the mysteries. So he's excellent no matter what. To discuss the mystery schools effectively, I need to start with where, when, and why they began. So I'm going to give you a brief summary of manifestation of our planet and of the human being after Pralaya. And this will help you understand where and why, so just kind of bear with me with this interesting and different introduction. So I have allergies. I have some water, so at times I'll stop for that. So the science speaks about the formation of a planet, likely from a black hole. And this picture is from NASA. And so manifestation of our world is poetically described in The Secret Doctrine in the stanzas of Dijon. Now that's an ancient Tibetan manuscript. That's the basis of The Secret Doctrine. The stanzas of Dijon refer to the nothingness before manifestation as the darkness that breathes over the slumbering waters of life. Then there's a correspondence with Christianity and Judaism in Genesis, the first book of the Old Testament in Christianity, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. Then the stanzas go on to explain the start of manifestation with darkness radiates light, and light drops one solitary ray into the waters. Genesis said, and God said, let there be light, and there was light. So as manifestation continues, it proceeds with gases formed from the simplest of molecules, maybe hydrogen or helium and other ionized gases. Blavatsky tells us that these clouds begin to form a spiritual sphere, then consolidate. Over millions of years, our planet becomes more defined, and human beings are created who are also, at first, only spiritual. We're taught in The Secret Doctrine that human beings evolve through a series of root races, or developmental stages, or waves of humanity, you might say. Now, they're not at all like our races today because we're in physical bodies. They're not physical, they're highly spiritual. So the first root race comes from the high angelic beings called Dhyani Chohans. Now there's no picture of these because they are arupa, with no form. Rupa means form and a means without. But Jeffrey Hodson the clairvoyant theosophical writer, he gives us pictures of the denser members of the angelic kingdom called Rupa Devas. And these are angels with form. And you can see the picture of the various deva or angelic beings. They give you a hint about the high celestial beings who help create humans. So how did a human being form? The first root race or developmental stage was projected by the angelic hierarchy out of their own essences. The stanzas and Blavatsky's tell us that they threw off their shadows or astral etheric bodies to make the form for humanity. So the picture on the left shows the etheric body of a human being, and this is what exuded out of the angelic beings to make our original form. Now, sometimes people can sense the etheric double off of our bodies or off of our hands, and it's a few inches away, and it's more than just heat. There's a sense of a little bit of a pressure or springiness. So to describe how this took place, HPB similarized it to what happens with mediums at a seance. So as you may know, when Blavatsky wrote The Secret Doctrine, spiritualism was very popular in the 1880s, and people were going to mediums to try to make contact with a relative who had died. Blavatsky said that sometimes materialized forms sometimes oozed out of the bodies of certain mediums, and these forms usually just vanished, but could be made more solid. And this is how the angelic beings oozed out the form for the first spiritual humans. It's a process similar to fission, where one part becomes two. Now, this humanity was mindless because they were just the etheric form. Then the second root race develops from the first in a process called budding or sweatborn. It exudes out of the original. So you can see the picture of the sea anemone, and it has offsprings in this way. You can see the smaller ones on the top there, and they'll eventually grow bigger and part from the parent and grow on their own. After millennia, the next level is the third root race of the Lemurians. Blavatsky described them as being only dreamlike, wrapped in a cloak of mental somnolence or thick fog. And they were operating only from instinct. During this third root race, the human beings are given their minds. The Secret Doctrine teaches that divine angelic beings, called Manasaputras, use the flame of the intellectual solar fire to awaken self-consciousness. And this is our awareness. So we all have that same awareness, and this came from the angels. And it's our awareness of where our body is, what's going on in the room, how we're seated. Now, the angelic entity, or the Manasaputras, incarnated into the ethereal human form. In Greek mythology, this was accomplished by Prometheus, and he stole the spark of the sacred fire from Mount Olympus. When the god Zeus found out, Prometheus' punishment was to be chained to a rock where an eagle, the emblem of Zeus, would peck at Prometheus's liver during the day, and it would grow back overnight. Now, I don't have time for the whole story, but eventually was rescued by Heracles. So this picture shows Prometheus on a vase that I tipped the picture to the side. And so the liver is remarkable. It can grow back if it's reduced by up to half. And it keeps us alive by clearing toxins from the blood, among other functions. But the liver has a lot of wear and tear from our emotions. So I think there's something to do with this, the liver getting pecked at every day in the daytime by the eagle. And we have to really watch how our emotions can sometimes overtake us. So the key is, in addition to being given our minds, humanity was also given guidance by the Manasaputras about morality, planting corn and wheat, which they needed to survive, as well as the arts and sciences, including architecture. Now, this is seen in the ruins of Mycenae, the citadel in Greece, from the third root race. And this is from Blavatsky. And that was thousands of years before our current era. So we're in the fifth root race. We're the densest and the smallest. So the larger third root race folks could maneuver these boulders. And then another example that Blavatsky cites is the Tiwanaku in Bolivia. And this statue represents how large the people were in the third root race, about 24 feet there. And then you probably have all seen or heard of Easter Island, where the Moai were huge as well. And you can see in the middle the picture of the human being standing next to the full statue. So from the third root race, we became denser and denser. So now I'm coming to why there were mystery schools in the first place. Blavatsky says there were no mystery schools at the time of the third root race. There weren't mystery schools because the ancient wisdom was common for all to know. So what is the ancient wisdom? Succinctly, it is theosophy, or detailed knowledge about the creation of the universe, how the laws of nature work, and information about the angelic kingdom and the higher planes, or like fairies. So the third root race, they developed emotion in a human being, and the mind developed clear power and choice. Now, many of Lemuria chose the path of spiritual inclination. Others chose a path of selfishness and greed. And the mysteries, this is Blavatsky, of heaven and earth revealed to the third root race by their celestial teachers, so that's the Manasaputras, in the days of their purity became the great focus of light. The rays from which became weakened as they were shed upon the two material soil. With the masses, they degenerated into sorcery. Now, sorcery refers to black magic, where someone selfishly goes after what they want and takes advantage of people in the process. It can involve manipulating the elementals and other supernatural beings through the will. And this could also be done through ritual. So this is in contrast to white magic or right-hand magic, which is selfless and done for others. An example is the priest's blessing and the sprinkling of holy water to the congregation. So on the other side, we humans can unconsciously do black magic by negative thoughts, where we might even in anger want to hurt someone. So this thinking doesn't bring much harm at this time because our will isn't very developed. But Blavatsky teaches us to be very mindful of what we think, because she says, between right and left-hand magic, there is but a cobweb thread. So our natural self-interest, which is what we need to survive, can overtake us and where we can forget about others. So with the development of this selfishness, Blavatsky describes how human beings had to have their power limited because they were doing negative things against their neighbor, threatening one's neighbor whose power for good was lavished freely only upon the self. So the magic and the power of the Atlantean black magicians, that's the fourth root race after the Lemurians, they had been a natural part of the life of the Lemurians, but the Atlanteans in the fourth root race used it to exploit and dominate the masses. Until then, there was no reason to have mystery schools. Selfishness was born out of the desires and passions hitherto unknown, and too often knowledge and power were abused, until finally it became necessary to limit the number who knew how to wield that power. Thus rose initiation. So there's a couple examples of initiation, knighthood, and a Hindu ceremony, but I'll be getting into what the initiation we learn about from Blavatsky. In the secret doctrine, she teaches that because of this abuse of power, a high spiritual being called the Lord of the World, or Sanat Kumara, selected a band of co-workers committed to protecting the ancient wisdom and put it to good use. So the great brotherhood was formed. So you can see Kuthumi and Moria there, as well as others. And this was also written about by Gordon D. Peruker in his Esoteric tradition. He says, the silent watcher of the globe, the Lord of the world, through the spiritual magnetic attraction of like to like, attracted certain human individuals of the third race to form a focus of spiritual light on earth. And this was the start of the Brotherhood of the Mahatmas. Blavatsky writes that those few elect thus became the sole guardians of the mysteries revealed, passing along the knowledge to those most fit to receive it, and of course, who wouldn't misuse it. This was 12 million years ago, and HPB says that these divine teachers were the germ of a hierarchy which never died since that period. So we can be so grateful for them and all that they've taught, because they really helped Blavatsky with the secret doctrine. They inspired the grand religions of the past and helped with discoveries in science and philosophy. And they will continue to send forth their help as long as mankind requires their care. So some of the world teachers are Jesus, Zoroaster, and that's where Iran now is. That's where he was. The deity Ahura Mazda, and then Buddha, Hermes, Egypt, and Lao Tzu from China. Now, the first mystery schools were established 4 to 5 million years ago in Atlantis, the fourth root race. They had to be secret and passed on information only to those who passed trials and probations, because the secrets about how to control the spiritual forces were being misused. In the collected writings, the mysteries were imparted to the intellect of that race when the average Atlantean had begun to fall too deeply into sin to be trusted with the secrets of nature. So the purpose of the mystery schools is to prepare people to be able to receive the esoteric knowledge of spirituality, and also to give rise to new recruits for the brotherhood. Now, the mysteries were divided into two distinct sections: the lesser mysteries and the greater mysteries. And the lesser mysteries is what we have in our world. They're simple moral codes for the people to live by, and they prepare us to be ready for the greater mysteries, where more deeper secret information is given. So you can see the 10 Commandments there, and they're very similar. They're Christianity and Judaism, very similar. And then the Hindu principles formalized by Patanjali. They have similar guidelines, just such as not hurting people or stealing or lying or being jealous. And these are important for us to watch within ourselves. Now, the difference between the lesser mysteries and the greater mysteries is depicted in various religions. For example, in Christianity, the Bible says, Jesus spoke to the multitudes in parable, but when they were alone, he expounded all things to his disciples. Jesus was an initiate of the mystery school of the Essenes, who were thought to be the authors of the Dead Sea Scrolls. And here's Qumran, where the scrolls were found. In Judaism, the lesser mysteries were given to the multitudes in the Torah, or the first 5 books of the Old Testament of the Bible. But the secret wisdom, the Chokmah Nestora, was given only to the few, orally, face to face, and mouth to ear. Similarly, in the Greek Eleusinian mysteries, the lesser mysteries were taught to candidates who were mistai, and that's closed of eye and mouth, and that's having no intuition yet. And so the picture on the vase is the mystery schools depicted. And the greater mysteries in Greece were taught to candidates who had developed epoptai, and that's clear seeing, or the intuitive perception of the divine realities, and it's the highest state of initiation. In Hinduism and then Buddhism, Buddha Gautama had one doctrine for his lay disciples, the other for his arhats, and his principle was to refuse no one admission to the ranks of candidates, but never to divulge the mysteries except to those who had proved themselves during the long years of probation to be worthy of initiation. We need to prove ourselves through small tests throughout our daily lives, over many lifetimes, where we choose the right-hand path over and over again, and to really watch the level of our, the mind, so that we don't do unconscious black magic. What the lesser mysteries taught correlates perfectly to Blavatsky's levels of consciousness. So the top is the spiritual higher self, and it's composed of the absolute God or the infinite divine, whatever word, the Atman, the intuition or buddhi, and then the higher mind, which is the intuition which utilizes reason and wisdom. So this is Atma Buddhi Manas. And then the personal everyday self is the lower mind, the everyday mind that lives in the world, plans our days, as well as the emotions or kama. Kama means the desire body, but it's related to the emotions very clearly. And then the physical body. So these levels can be used as a guide to see what the mystery schools taught, and they correlate perfectly. Starting at the lowest level, the physical, the lesser mysteries included self-purification of the body. That means eating right, not too much, vegetarianism, and no tobacco, drug use, or alcohol. The emotions are to be regulated. All negative emotions are to be curtailed. Accepting what happens in life is important, as well as learning detachment and desirelessness. The purpose of life was taught and how to consciously participate in its evolution, along with karma and reincarnation. Now, I went ahead there, so this slide speaks about the mind. That's the next level of consciousness, developed by controlling one's thoughts and realizing how they affect our surroundings. Then, of course, here is the higher mind with the purpose of life, karma, and reincarnation. Corresponding to the Buddhic level, the mystery schools emphasize developing the intuition through self-study. And now that's noticing what we do, how we think, as well as opening to our shadow, parts of ourselves that we may not want to face. Contemplation and meditation, and these all help to develop our intuition. Then lastly, the Atman, or the awareness of unity, develops through meditation and altruism. That unity, or the giving, because we're all one. Blavatsky says, all that is noble and grand in human nature was cultured by the priest philosophers who sought to develop them in their initiates. Their code of ethics was based on altruism. So what did people learn in the mystery schools? So the information of the greater mysteries was passed on only to those who could access self-born wisdom. Now that's wisdom perceived intuitively from the master to the initiate. Now, to not feel like you're excluded or anything, we're all familiar with this self-born wisdom because it may be like from our conscience prompting us to do right, or it may be as we know something about a situation or we know what's going to happen. All of these things are examples of self-born wisdom arising from within. So the esoteric wisdom needs to be conveyed. This is for adeptship intuitively because it was such a large amount of information. HPB says the whole essence of truth cannot be transmitted from mouth to ear, nor can any pen describe it, unless a man finds the answer in the innermost depth of his divine intuition. There's just so much information, like how the laws of nature work, or the angelic kingdom. Or what is love? You can't describe it with words. So the intuition is needed. Now, because the mysteries were secret and the mystery schools respected that, not much was written about them. But we do know what other Greeks wrote about them. One is the mystery school of Pythagoras. So the outer court of the temple refers to the lessons in the lesser mysteries. Discipline was emphasized to control the lower nature. Women were admitted, and vegetarianism was encouraged or required at that point. Meditation was expected, and 5 years of silence was imposed. So as you can imagine, many failed to keep their vows and were sent home. So the silence really can quell our desire body and what we're thinking about if we're all wrapped up in our emotions. But it would be really a challenge. I'm sure you all could feel that way too. Disciples had to reject all worldly privileges from a noble birth or family wealth. If a person displayed pride or arrogance, menial duties were imposed upon him. They were taught self-examination, where each morning the disciple was to seek out weaknesses to correct. Before retiring at night, he was to review his conduct to find failings and their consequences. So meditation was very important to develop a state of mind where one can, as Blavatsky says, live in the eternal at all times. So this is the goal, to fully know the unity of life. She says, slowly but surely, meditation acts like leaven in the loaf or yeast in the bread to awaken divine intuition. So we know a little bit about Patanjali's mystery school of yoga and his 5 practices to live in the world and 5 internal practices for personal development. And they're very similar in all the lesser mysteries. So the first was external practices of nonviolence, ahimsa, telling the truth, satya, not stealing, asteya, sexual fidelity, brahmacharya, and not holding on to things or experiences. No jealousy. And that comes from the root graha, which means to grasp. And the A is not having that. And then the personal observances include cleanliness, shaucha, santosha, the contentment that can be elusive in our lives, but to really try to nourish that. Self-control or tapas. Now, just an example about this tapas. So a pregnant woman may withhold drinking coffee during her pregnancy and other things. So we can deny ourselves various things like alcohol. And then swadhyaya, self-study. Now that's the witness that we use to watch ourselves. How are we acting? Are we offending anyone? What is our behavior like? And then the self-surrender, Ishvara Pranidhana. Now that's letting go of the lower self. And Patanjali goes on setting the stage for meditation. He says, first of all, asana. Now, many of you may have heard of it as a pillow in a yoga class, but it's the posture for meditation and the right attitude or frame of mind. And that's a wider view. And it goes with pranayama or breathing exercises, but in a broader way, it means right communication with other living creatures because it's the breath that we use to communicate. The next guideline continues with meditation, pratyahara, and that's withdrawing our attention from our sensory organs, that what we hear, and we have our eyes shut, but we stop thinking about how our body feels. Then we have dharana. That's the first part of meditation. It's concentration or centering your mind on the self, or maybe using a mantra, Om Mani Padme Hum, or Om. And then dhyana, deeper meditation or contemplation, and then samadhi. That's pretty hard to get to, but it's total absorption in the self. And these help prepare us for initiation. Annie Besant writes of the levels of initiation in this book, and the first one can happen when we are asleep. And I bet everyone here has experienced it. They can take place in our astral bodies because when we're in the physical body, we have our brain that gets in the way. On the astral plane is where initiations take place, and when we're sleeping, they happen. So then we can access the mental plane. We haven't been able to learn how to get into the astral level at will. But one of these, the effects of this initiation is the deep realization of the unity of all of life, and we know it in our bones. And I think theosophists know that. It's just what from the people I've run across. So Annie Besant says, the more a person develops, the more is demanded. If he errs, karma is swift and stern. So some of you may have even noticed, maybe you've had some karma come back, and it can increase if we've even given that as an okay at some level. Until higher initiations, she says that we are to live a noble life in the position that karma has ordained. Very good advice here. For greater initiations, we learn from Gordon D. Peruker, they often take place in a subterranean cave, the forest, or a mountain pass, a temple crypt, or a pyramid. Now, in the pyramid chamber, it's due to being away from the thought forms and often negative emotions of the surrounding community. And the astral light, what they call it, is quieter and cleaner. And that's from on the astral plane. So you can here see an Egyptian initiation chamber in the king's chamber of the Great Pyramid. And I visited there and I was up there and took this picture. And the atmosphere is very old. There's no sense of spirituality at all, like you might feel from a meditation room. It's extremely old, as well as like Stonehenge, if you've ever visited there. It's very serious but ancient feeling. So in that sarcophagus, that's where the initiate would lay. And he deliberately lays flat and gets himself into a meditative state where his mind and body are in abeyance. And as Peruker describes it, he paralyzes his body so he can work in his astral body. And the candidate's body is left in the sarcophagus where it's watched over. And this experience of reaching the higher mental plane affects a person deeply, and they're changed. And it shows in his aura. And this is what Charles Leadbeater writes about. When the initiate returns, his head shines with a halo of spiritual sight. And so many paintings depict holy men and women in this way. And many people have seen this, like they might describe seeing Sai Baba or a holy person and then seeing this halo. So during a higher initiation, there are cruel trials that the initiate has to overcome on the astral plane. So you probably have all heard that on the astral plane, there's negative entities and emotions that need to be ignored. And there are tests. The first is the initiate must show that he controlled the elements of earth, air, fire, and water, and penetrate in full consciousness worlds more material than ours. And his intuition shows him the way. Gordon D. Peruker gives us information about why initiations take place this way. He says it's one of the fundamental teachings of occultism that nothing can be truly known which is not experienced or lived through. After preparatory purifications, then comes the mystic death. The body and the lower principles are, so to say, paralyzed, and the soul is temporarily freed. The inner man is guided while he passes to other planes by becoming them, which is the only way that knowledge can root itself in the soul through experience. So initiations may last either 1 day and night, 3 days and nights, or up to 2 weeks. And the higher initiations take place when certain astronomical conjunctions occur, such as the new moon, where the moon is directly between the earth and the sun. And so here's a picture of the moon, the new moon. Greater initiations take place when there's a conjunction of Venus, Mercury, and the sun, because that's where the initiate is headed, to the solar logos, the Sanat Kumara. The fifth and highest initiation takes place when adeptship occurs and takes place at the winter solstice and lasts 2 weeks. So these planetary conjunctions allow the initiate to move along magnetic lines and leave the Earth and ascend through Venus and Mercury to the Sun and then return. And this is on the mental plane, from the astral plane. And he becomes, for a passing moment, the wondrous watcher himself, the solar logos. So after the fifth initiation, the initiate returns 2 weeks later on Epiphany in Christianity, or 12 days after Christmas. And this comes from epi, meaning upon, and pheno, to shine forth. And that's shining forth the divine light. And that's from the initiate. The greatest known initiation is the birth of a Buddha. And it happens at the winter solstice with conjunctions of Moon, Mercury, Venus, and the Sun. And it's very rare, and it happens only maybe twice in a root race, or in 8 to 9 million years. So we're so blessed with the Buddha. So these conjunctions don't occur very often, but initiations go on the same at the 3 other sacred seasons. That's the 2 equinoxes of spring and fall and the summer solstice. And these, when less developed, candidates are initiated. So these mysteries were known around the world, such as by the Druids of Ireland and Scotland, or by the priests of Mithraism. That's where Iran now is, 2nd and 3rd centuries, current era. And HPB tells of others initiated into the mysteries, including Jesus, Krishna, Apollonius of Tyana, Tsongkhapa, the Tibetan Buddhist monk, and of course Shankaracharya, the Indian sage, and then Plato. Christian Rosenkreutz, the founder of the Rosicrucians. HPB says he was an incarnation of Comte de Saint-Germain, and he learned the mysteries in Egypt. And the Rosicrucians are still around today. So what happened to the mystery schools? Some died out or had to go underground, as Freemasonry did. The Eleusinian mysteries lasted more than 1,000 years, and they initiated noblemen, commoners, women and men, and free persons as well as slaves. As Christianity flourished, the mysteries of Eleusis were thought to be subversive and were closed. And then Roman Emperor Theodosius II banished paganism in favor of Christianity, and the mysteries in the West ended. Then Justinian I closed the last philosophical school of Athens, Plato's Academy. And actually, this wasn't so bad because HPB says that the sacred rituals of the union with the soul, with the higher self, had turned into an orgy. So the mystery tradition went underground and was preserved in Hermeticism, Neoplatonism and Gnosticism, Kabbalah, alchemy, and Freemasonry. So we're encouraged by Master Kuthumi, fear not, our knowledge will not pass away. The keepers of the sacred light did not safely cross so many ages ago to be wrecked on the rocks of modern skepticism. And so we have theosophy to help us learn about them. So we're not to get discouraged. HPB says that the process is difficult, but there is a road. And that road, steep and thorny, beset with perils of every kind, but it is yet a road. And there's no danger that dauntless courage cannot conquer, no trial that spotless purity cannot pass through, no difficulty that strong intellect cannot surmount. For those who win onward, there is reward past all telling. And I can tell I'm getting choked up, so bear with me. And the reward is the power to bless, and save humanity. For those who fail, there are other lives in which success may come. To me, very moving. So hopefully all this information inspires you to live as the mystery schools taught and one day receive the higher initiations of the greater mysteries. And namaste.
Thank
So
you.
you're sure welcome.